So to understand why the messenger always gets shot, just try to part somebody from their money, doesn't matter how small a sum, and notice the reaction. If we think about, let's take one that's in the papers recently, the Lucy Letby case. And a lot's known about that, a lot's been put into the public domain. And one of the things that surprised a lot of people is, and I think it's two things. One is the number of times clinicians raised their concerns with management and nothing happened. And I think the second thing, which I haven't seen raised, is that why, when the first clinician had suspicions, and I'm going to say this carefully, that this nurse was murdering babies, why raising it with management felt sufficient and that person did not go directly to the police. Murder is not a management issue, it's a criminal issue. Normally with criminal issues you would think someone would go to the police rather than just report it to management. And that leads me to a question, which is, somebody should ask that clinician, would you have left your own baby in that unit with that nurse unsupervised? And if the answer is no, what was it that stopped you taking it further the moment you had that suspicion? And too often where the answers lie is back in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I'm going to mix that with some of the work of Richard Barrett. I apologise to both if they think I've got this wrong. But our basic needs, safety and security, the physiological needs at the bottom level, love and belonging, if we have gaps in our basic needs, then our focus in our life becomes about satisfying those needs. We use our egos to do that. And while we're in that state of development as a human being, the one thing we can't take into account, I'm using can't advisedly, is the needs of others. So when we assess this situation from a distance, so it's a situation that other people are in, not us, we're all thinking, well, why on earth didn't so-and-so do this, do that, do the other? Like I've just asked, why didn't they go to the police? Why didn't they do that? Why didn't they speak up more vociferously? Why didn't they make a fuss, go on strike, walk out, do something other than just let it happen? And the underlying emotion in those basic unmet needs is fear. This is the ego and fear working together to get the basic needs met. So then you say, well, so what was the clinician scared of? Well, the health sector has a history of punishing whistleblowers. You see people coming into the public domain now going, well, I did blow the whistle on this situation or that situation, and then I was put through a disciplinary procedure and I was sacked. Obviously, there might also be people who were facing a disciplinary procedure and then raise a whistleblowing issue as a smokescreen for the fact they were sacked for incompetence. Who knows what the real situation is? But the NHS isn't the only organisation that punishes whistleblowers. The armed forces have been known to do this. Private industry does it. It's every hierarchy punishes whistleblowers. So what's the reason for that? The reason is that the whistleblower threatens the status quo. So if I'm a manager in an organisation, my focus is not the customer, it's not my colleagues, it is my job. So will I be able to pay my mortgage next month, and will I get my bonus at the end of the year and continue in my career? That is my sole focus. I literally do not care about anything else or anyone else, and I will do whatever it takes to protect my interest. And this is the pattern we see time and time again. And the difference between, let's say, a worker, so we'll classify a worker as the only responsibility they have is for themselves, whereas a manager has a responsibility over others. But there's a significant difference in their environments. The worker is part of a peer group, and that peer group acts to moderate the behaviour of that individual. The manager is not in such a tight peer group. So there is little to no moderation of their behaviour. And so often you hear about people deciding, well, now I'm in charge, I'm going to do it my way. And however stupid their way is, because they're the boss, no one will say otherwise, because guess what? If the face doesn't fit, they'll get fired. And people learn that in a hierarchy, you keep your nose down and your mouth shut. That's the way you pay your rent or your mortgage and you have a job tomorrow. And so these fear-driven environments create situations where if someone does raise their hand, they do speak up about something going wrong, the first thing that happens is they get stepped on. That makes the issue go away. Well, actually, of course it doesn't, but it makes the issue go away as far as the organisation concerned. And I have a really interesting example. I won't name the company. It was a long time ago, but I think across Europe, this company had 12,000 employees. And this was in a time when I and some friends, we had a little consulting company. We specialised in lean supply chains because that was my background back then. And we knew this company through its own shops had absolutely shocking delivery performance, about 50% of the time. We knew it was hemorrhaging orders hand over fist. Customers could not get the product. And we spoke to the company's head of logistics, who said, yeah, internally, on-time delivery was over 90%. And what it transpired was that they knew full well that the way we measured performance was in fact correct. They were at about 50%. But the way the director of logistics got a quiet life was by reporting that delivery was actually 90%. So you have an organisation of 12,000 people, the man at the top saying, we've got 12,000 people, we can't possibly need help from outside. You'd think he'd be right. We must have the expertise inside. But the expertise inside was focused on having a quiet life. And quiet life is obviously I get paid tomorrow. I'm going to get my bonus at the end of the year because I've made my KPIs look right. And I haven't got any stress factors like people pointing out this is a load of rubbish. So we were unable to win work with that business because the people in charge functionally didn't want to solve that problem. It was easier for them just to cover over the cracks and pretend the problem didn't exist. And the overall man in charge didn't want to believe that his own people weren't capable of solving the problem. So they ended up losing sales. We watched that brand decline over the following 20 years, probably to the complete mystification of the board, but not to us. It was entirely obvious that that organisation was not going to prosper. And in fact, they've got competitors based in other countries now who've absolutely leapfrogged them in terms of brand value. I don't think they've recovered from that decline. And that was the problem of becoming internally focused, and the focus being the maintenance of the hierarchy by the people in it. And this is the natural state for any hierarchy, and that's why whistleblowers get shot, and you get these events like in extremis you get the Lucy Letby cases, where the internal focus of the organisation becomes, they call it protecting reputation. No, that's not what they're doing. They're protecting their individual jobs. It's nothing to do with the reputation of the business at all. It's down to the individual person protecting their livelihood. Their fear of loss of livelihood is what they're protecting. So if you're interested in this whole subject, I really recommend a book by a guy called Matthew Syed. It's called Black Box Thinking. And one of the distinctions Matthew raises in the book is the difference between airline pilots and surgeons. Now, I don't know all the structures of the airline industry, but what I do understand is that if something goes wrong for whatever reason, a pilot reports it anonymously, and they all do this without fear of consequence. The same doesn't happen on the side of medics. I think we're getting better in the NHS than we were, but even within my lifetime you could see a surgeon doing something that was going to be catastrophically wrong, and the nurse wouldn't speak up because the consultant was a sir and you didn't speak up when Sir was in the room. So you get people leaving instruments in bodies and all kinds of stuff going wrong, or people dying, and then it's reported as unforeseen circumstances. In fact, an old school friend of mine, brigadier in the army, actually, a lovely, lovely man, met his wife and his family. It was an absolute pleasure. And then within a couple of years, I'd heard that he'd gone into hospital for a routine operation and, quote, died due to unforeseen circumstances. Well, I'm sorry, but there weren't unforeseen circumstances. Somebody made a mistake and doesn't want to admit it. And I believe that in the NHS they took a retired head of the Air Accident Investigation Branch and brought him into the NHS to try and create the same culture in the NHS, so that we could learn from mistakes rather than just try and brush them under the carpet. So here's a question for you. Why do pilots care about this stuff and act on it? And I'm just not picking on surgeons in particular. Let's say surgeons don't. What is the difference? It should be obvious to you. The difference is that when a pilot makes a mistake, the pilot dies alongside the passengers. When the surgeon makes a mistake, the patient dies, but not the surgeon. And that significant difference explains why pilots report stuff, because they don't want to die. And the tendency in the medical profession, whether it's nurse-led clinicians or consultant-led clinicians, is not to report stuff because they're worried about their own livelihoods, their ability to practice, and their own personal reputations. Yeah? When you take all that crap out and focus on what can we learn from the event, that's when you get the organizational learning, practice is improved, and patient and customer outcomes improve.